Hi, this is Phil, and I'm here to make sure you know all about the Capes and Lunatics Patreon. Don't miss out on all new episodes of Wade's World, Boob Windows and Long Boxes, our Hard R movie reviews, and so much more, all completely uncensored. Access starts for as little as $1 a month, full videos when you pledge $3 a month. Check us out at the link in all of our show notes, or just go straight to patreon.com/capesandlunatics. Hope to see you there.
This is DG Chichester, and you're listening to the Capes and Lunatics Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Devil You Know, the Daredevil Podcast. I am Phil. Hopefully we'll have Lilith here soon, but once again, it's that time again. Oh, yeah, she said start without her. Yes, Lilith.
Okay.
But yes, it's, as you can hear, yes, it's that time of the month again. We got Mr. DG Chichester back. Hello, sir.
Hello, Phil and Lilith, wherever you are. Hello to you. We'll get you on here soon enough.
Yes, she'll be here. All right, so this time we were talking Daredevil 305 and 306, June and July 1992, yes. Yeah, it's the I love this one. It's the guest starring Spider-Man.
Yes. Yeah, it's a fun one. It is the only plots that Ralph Macchio, as my editor, outright rejected on the first go, and said, "You got to go fix these." So I do. It does stick out in my mind for that reason, especially.
Oh, Lilith just messaged me. She says people are mowing their lawns very loudly here right at the moment.
By her or by
her?
Oh,
like, man, everyone's getting it.
I guess.
I'm surprised I didn't hear anything around my house. So why did he reject it outright the first time?
Well, they were grisly. I mean, the story's kind of grisly. Certainly if folks haven't read them, we'll talk more about the plot maybe, but there's a character called the Surgeon General who is a sort of a new villain that we brought in for this, and she's harvesting body organs for profit, which is just not a pleasant thing to do or think about. Mm-hmm. And I think this was probably at the apex of also when I was writing a lot of the Clive Barker material. Clive Barker being very famous author and filmmaker who specialized in horror, for folks who don't know his work. And I was very invested in that and doing a lot of that work. And when you live in that world, probably a lot of things seem very natural to you to kind of go the extra distance in how much more strange can this get. And I think that because, well, this was not a horror story, certainly had horrific elements in it. And I think I may have went too far with some of the descriptions or scenes, and Ralph rightly, reined me back in and reminded me, this is Daredevil, not Hellraiser. And both may have devils in them, but they're very different characters. So, he reined me back in, and whatever, I can't remember the specifics of what that was, but definitely fixed things up. Although there still are some, having reread it in prep for this, there's still some kind of grisly things, senses and sloshings and that kind of thing. So
exactly. I mean, and again, did you see something like or read something in real life that inspired the Surgeon General? Because I found it interesting that it's like usually if someone teams up Spider-Man and Daredevil, like the temptation is always like, oh, we got to bring in like a straight up super villain, you know, even if it's just something ridiculous like Stiltman or something. But but yeah, I was like, this isn't like this isn't like a super villain. This is just basically just like an evil person, you know, harvesting organs for profit. So
yeah, and it's fun. I'm glad that kind of came across. And I know there's like a line in there where Parker or Spider-Man says to Daredevil something, you know, your bad guys aren't very nice. You know, as terrible as his rogues gallery is, and it is in a lot of ways on the Spider-Man side, especially when you get into your Venoms and your Carnages but even the run of the mill guys, quote unquote run of the mill, you know, Electro's terribly powerful and so forth. Yeah, the outlandish qualities of them probably offset things. You know, this is a pretty nasty, you know, villain and what she's doing. And she's definitely like a profiteer in that way. So I thought that was an interesting line that kind of probably wasn't, I don't even know if that was in the plot, but, you know, seems like that might've been one of those things that kind of came out as I went through writing it and that realization of it. I know at that time, whether it was an urban myth or not, you know, urban myth, you know, being one of those stories that is always passed around. Hey, I got a friend of a friend who heard this, but nobody can actually validate anything. There were certain stories of things like this happening, you know, people going out for a good time. And that's kind of what happens in the story for folks who haven't read it. You know, it starts off with somebody going out to clubs and having a great time and thinking he's going to score with an attractive woman and then finding out he wakes up the next morning or later in a park in this instance and geez, I don't feel so well. And he discovers he's been operated on and organs that could be sold for profit have been removed for his body. So it's not just Dexter level grisly activity. It's somebody actually profiting off his body. So there were urban myth stories I know kind of going around at that time. Mm-hmm. Probably none of them really validated. I've probably flagged it like I did a lot of stuff we've talked about and said, geez, this might make a good story. And it was probably something I played with a couple of times. And this is where it came to life in its biggest way. But I don't know if it's a story that really, it actually holds up better than I think. You know, that's what I like about doing this thing with you guys. I go back and I reread these things and stuff that I sort of said, I don't know if that really came together. It holds up pretty well.
Oh yeah.
But it's just a weird thing. And then I never revisit it, right? We don't go back to the Surgeon General and we don't really return to her, even though again, she's sort of a character you could have done more with. But I don't know if the grisly nature of it really fits the overall theme of things, even though it has a very street level quality to it. But that's probably where it came from. I don't know if those stories were ever really validated or if that was all just the type of things that people said, oh yeah, that happened to a friend of mine, but nobody's ever been able to say things like that really happened.
That's the sad part. It's like, yeah, I don't know if it's true, but I could completely believe it. I mean, just with the way human trafficking works and stuff, I could see people like,
oh, I could see it. That's I think why it had that.
Oh, yeah.
If it's not real, that's maybe why it keeps resurfacing. It's funny. I just watched, was goaded into watching the entire run of Justified. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but, about a kind of a shoot from the hip, old West lawman type in modern day Kentucky, I guess. And, Timothy Oliphant is the character. So it's a great, persona, but it actually had, oddly enough, halfway through this organ harvesting story. So they either had the same clip file I did, or it was just said, hey, here's something we can do.
Do you think your editor was like a little extra cautious about this story because you were doing the Spider-Man team up?
Well, they were right next to each other, or two doors down from each other. This would have probably been Danny at this point, Danny Fingeroth. we definitely had to get permission to use Spider-Man, making sure he's not off planet or something, at that time, he's not in another dimension or somewhere we could actually kind of grab him. And obviously we had to acknowledge and work within the confines of where he was at that point. You could sort of see me bending over backwards to acknowledge, because Daredevil, for folks who haven't read the story, drags Peter Parker in because Peter Parker's a young guy. He's a good-looking guy. He wants to use him as bait, essentially, in these nightclubs to lure this Surgeon General character into picking him up. But, of course, Peter Parker's married at this time. So you can't just sort of throw, which, again, it sort of shows Matt's manipulative side, to sort of just, I'm going to use people and things to kind of get what I need. But he, I don't remember any reaction from the Spider office on, you've got to change this and you've got to do this. Mm-hmm. As grisly as this story kind of nods to in some of these things, it doesn't hold a candle to Carnage. So I mean,
Exactly.
This is a Phil. This is like a bedtime story for kids compared to some of those tales.
Oh, I know. I felt more comfortable reading some Carnage stories than this. Yeah. But I mean, again, it holds up because, again, except for the reference to the marriage, this could be Spider-Man at almost any point, in modern storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that's always where you kind of come around to the certain aspects of these characters that work well are things that you can return to, mm-hmm. and they're nice touch points. Which doesn't mean they're static, hardly, right? None of these characters are static, but the essence of them that you want to play with maintains itself. So if you're writing Spider-Man or putting Spider-Man in a story, he's not grim and street, and you see that. Daredevil's quite grim in this story. He's really upset, and he's really sort of charged up. In retrospect, a little too much, maybe that's something Ralph should have me dial down a little bit more, play with in a different way. But hindsight's always 20/20, and you sort of wonder where you are at certain points in your head that also influence what you do, not just from a story influence, but sometimes why, what's going on in your real life sometimes plays out on the page within the story. And that's, that's infamously like why a movie like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is so grim and nasty, because what George Lucas was going through a divorce and Steven Spielberg was doing something else. So like their life almost comes through.
I mean, I thought it worked, especially coming off 304, which we'll get to like towards the end of the year. It's like, I mean, you already showed Matt really cares about people.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like, just the ongoing, Surgeon General's, just indifference to human life just kept getting the Matt. And eventually, at the end of the second one, he's just basically just like, I can't take this anymore.
That's exactly it. And I think that was certainly the essence of the story, that indifference to human life compared to what he was, who he is and how he acts. That's a big part of it. I guess, again, I can be very self-critical of things. And, mm-hmm. and I think there's probably just some places where I wouldn't have changed the intent. I might have smoothed it out a little bit, in terms of how he reacts and kind of gets in the face of things, or gets himself so wound up, and he even questions himself, within the aspects of the story of like, why am I feeling this way? Foggy comes in at one point, right? Talks to him about, mm-hmm. you just reset your life, right? We just got you back on track after 300. Where are you now? What are you doing? You're falling back into old patterns. And in essence, whether Foggy knows or doesn't know, and I think we've kind of played it out that Foggy sort of acts like he does know, the both sides of things. Then you just rescued both sides of your life. You can't now risk one for the other.
But yeah, I mean, and again, I think the some people would just have Spider-Man guest star to guest star, which I'm sure there was like sales things in there, the considerations, but I think Spider-Man worked as like the other side of Foggy in this, in these issues, because, Spider-Man was out there in the field with Matt, as Matt's, just anger is building towards the Surgeon General. It was good to have Spider-Man there to say, hey, slow down. You get, you don't want to become hurt,
Right. It's good to have a foil. Otherwise, it's all internal monologue, and characters can represent, certain things and different sides of it. I think it also just gave Scott McDaniel, some nice places to play with visuals of the characters above the city, which opened up the story.
Okay.
There's some really nice, couple splashes or that sort of thing, where they're just hanging on top of buildings, which of course these guys do, all the time. But that also just gave some, nice opening up of the story from the darker elements as well, by having them be themselves, and by that I mean kind of, playing with the rooftops in their own ways. So, it was good to explore that. And I think, foils, by playing off other characters is always interesting. It's a way then to see how they react to somebody without you having to have the character state everything himself or herself.
And I mean, as dark as the story as it was, there were times, you were able to fit some humor in there, because I love when, when Peter goes undercover, he has to have he puts the mustache on, and, and it makes sense,
The cheesy mustache,
yeah.
And I think I acknowledged that at one point of because he's somewhat well known or whatever. There's definitely moments in that, and then once you get into Spider-Man territory, he became a way to lighten things up, because you can have him do his trademark quippishness or throwing asides or questions or what are you doing? Because that's the playfulness and aspects of that character, that get stretched out. So
I mean, I think my favorite part of that is like, Surgeon General's about to attack Peter, and he's like waiting for Daredevil. Was like anytime, and Matt just grabs him and throws him off the buildings. He's like, I know he'll stick to the side of the building, so I'm just
exactly. It's sort of he says, now I know why they call you Daredevil, and and he just chucks him over. Hello.
Speaking of a woman who has
sorry about that.
Speaking of a woman who has stabbed men. Hello, Lilith Hellfire.
Good morning. Sorry about that.
That's
You've got a powerful green screen behind you. So what are you going to do with that? How have you been?
Pretty good. How about yourself, sir?
Good. We were just throwing Peter Parker off a rooftop.
Yes.
Once you joined us.
My favorite moment. But no, it's so funny you messaged me about the lawn mowing, because like right before we started, he was like, "Hey, if it gets too loud, let me know. I can close the window. There's people outside." Like,
yeah, it's the day for it.
Hey, it's summer,
We got a new neighbor. They don't know no better, because I kind of like let my neighbors know.
I'm sure you do.
Don't mess with the atmosphere around this time. So you got
we all kind of agreed, and they're new, so.
Yeah, there were some good, places to play with the city there. I mean, I remember taking there's a friend of mine, or an older friend of mine, who gets name checked. I think in 306, there's a thanks to a guy named Jonathan Fishman, who at that time worked down at the World Trade Center, and so he was able to get me kind of a walking tour within the Winter Garden area. Which we used as a setting, there where there's that party of all the folks, and then the Surgeon General and her team move in. So it was nice to be able to get that as a walk through and get a sense of the space. And I think it comes across, and I was able to get photo reference for Scott to work with. So things like that, I think, make it feel like it's more real, and gave me an idea for some of the action scenes and sequences to suggest to Scott that, we knock them through this, or we blow up that, or whatever.
And that's where that film school intuition kicks in. Above and beyond, sir. Above and beyond.
Sometimes, I mean, you just get that, and I like that. I've always liked having the reality of things,
well, it is set in an actual real place in a real world. Yeah, that makes sense.
And while you can make things up, the more detail you can give to something, I think it makes it more real for you. Nowadays, artists can probably look up anything they want, really quickly. But again, at that point in time, it would have been extremely difficult to say, hey, they're in this setting. And even if I described all the glass and the pylons and the views, Scott would have still been scratching his head saying, I don't really live in New York. What am I going to do with this? So.
And again, I mean, you said this story holds up, and it absolutely does, just because, like you said, except for references like the World Trade Center or Spider-Man's marriage, I mean, this could be happening pretty much at any point in time.
Right. Yeah. It is relatively, solid. That's why I enjoy, again, appreciate what you guys are doing with me here, because I get to go back and reread these things and sometimes say, that story doesn't really work. And, but no, it's a solid story. And, there's a couple of things on the nose. I mean, her last name being Cutter, I probably wouldn't do nowadays, but
it's a comic book. It's fine.
And again, let the editors make these choices too. I have to,
There's a grand tradition there. I mean, a guy named Otto Octavius became Dr. Octopus.
So true. We should have had a team up with them. That's could have gotten them.
Like I said, I appreciate. It's always the temptation. You bring in Spider-Man, you're going to have like a super villain. Even if it's just like somebody cannon fodder like Stiltman or Shocker or something. But no, you just kept it. Again, just a very evil person.
Jill, don't bring up Stiltman, or we might have to have Stiltman September.
Well, we covered Stiltman. We should have talked about Stiltman more with the Grease story, and kind of played that out. But it's you mentioned before, Phil. I am sure, I am beyond sure, that including Spider-Man was partly a sales ploy, as much as anything else. How do we, how do we pattern out, certain things within the book to both do good for the character and do good for his own storylines, but acknowledging the fact that we live in a larger universe of characters, but also a larger universe of sales concerns. I'm sure there was something about, can we get some Spider in here? And that would have been, again, the reason that the Spider office would have said no, not because we didn't get along with them or that they didn't like the story, but you can only spread, if they're being responsible, the character can only be spread so many places, in 1 month, right? Mm-hmm. So Spider-Man was in demand, the X-Men was in demand, Wolverine's in demand, all the high-ticket items are in demand. So fortunately, we got in early enough, they allowed us to kind of like, play with this. Now later on,
so weird because it just seems like Spider-Man and Daredevil, they kind of like go hand in hand. Like their stories, like there's so many classic stories. You would think that nobody would hesitate to say like, oh yeah, Spider-Man and Daredevil, let's make that happen again.
there was no hesitation on that from a storytelling point of view or a character point of view, but definitely there was a sense that, and things were a lot looser in those days than I'm sure they are now, but there were still points in time where the editorial office would try to assert certain control because 50 different comics want to use Spider-Man this month, which means, A, we got to keep track of 50 more stories than we normally do. And also, realistically, big air quotes around that, how is Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and all these places when he's also supposed to be doing all this stuff in his own book and storyline? So, this is where monthly continuity comics work for you and against you at the same time, because people get too over concerned with that kind of stuff. We can't possibly be,
Life pro tip: if an editor ever says that to you, new comic book artists, especially if it's any character living in New York, it's New York. It's the city that never sleeps. Peter never sleeps. He can do it. It's plausible.
But this would be, how can it be downtown at the World Trade Center when he's uptown in this other comic or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, let's make it believable. He only had three books at this time. Yeah,
exactly. He can get around. No, but we didn't have any. As I said, we didn't have any issues with that at all. I mean, the biggest issue, as I said, was Ralph, doing a course correction on my story sensibilities, and that was the right thing to do.
Sometimes it feels a certain way, but reading your stuff, like I never thought it's like, oh, he's milking the guest stars because early on you had Punisher, then Ghost Rider. I never thought you were like, oh yeah, he's just throwing him in the. No, like I said, Spider-Man made perfect sense. The Spider Sense would be able to tell him who Surgeon General was because they didn't even know what she looked like at this point.
Right, and that was the fun little things, like how do I ping this person in the room and draw it out. So once we had somebody. It was my nature to want to use them to their best ability. And how do you play it out? Ghost Rider doesn't necessarily fit in Daredevil's world, but once I had him in that particular issue, we played it out well. I remember Bobby Chase, being very positive on how we used Ghost Rider in that, which probably ultimately led to me doing some work with her with the Midnight Suns comics. So here, once we had Spider-Man, how do you play him off? And I think, I probably didn't think about it when we first said, hey, let's get Spider-Man in some issues for sales reasons. I wasn't thinking that, I'm going to do this really dark story and he's going to be the perfect foil because he's lighter in nature. Ultimately, that then becomes exactly how well he works because he doesn't have a counterpoint. If Spider-Man wasn't in this story, I don't think it would work as well, right? If this was just Matt and Daredevil pursuing this really grim villain, it would be a different, it would be all that grim stuff all the time, and that would be too much to take in a particular story. So it was a gift in some ways to have that ability to play it off.
Well, like I said before, yeah, Matt cares about people so much, and then he started getting, more angry with Surgeon General, just her apathy and stuff. Mm-hmm. So you needed someone there to say, back down.
Right. Or just let the pressure off in a couple of things.
Yeah.
Turn the pressure up, and then Spider-Man quips about something or whatever, and then you get a chance to change the dynamic a little bit. Even if Matt may not acknowledge it, the reader can acknowledge it, right? The reader's got a little bit of a different moment in time.
I was going to say, you probably don't have that original script you're talking about, do you? It was probably a victim of the crash.
Yeah, there's so much. I still have that hard drive somewhere, and I like the physical hard drive. I actually tried to send it into one of those hyper secure places at one point that, for several thousands of dollars would go in with a white glove treatment and guys, I guess, in like hazmat suits.
In the clean room. Yeah.
Yeah, the clean room. Exactly. And they just sent it back to me and said, yeah, we can't do anything with this. So this is one of the, places that'll charge you big money for it. And they were like, nah, but I've held on to it. I'm sure there's nothing to be done with it ever. So I should just drill through it and just toss it. But no, it's the great tragedy, Phil.
I'm just curious because Lilith, he was saying
floppy disk would have never done you wrong. That's all I'm saying.
But then the thing with floppy disks, I wouldn't have anything to read the floppy disk on anymore, right? You can't plug a floppy disk player into a modern computer. You'd need so many dongles and connections. You never.
I'm just curious because Lilith, he said this is the only story his editor denied the first time because I guess it was so gruesome the first time he had to tone it down.
Yeah, it was.
Modern comics would have never done that to you, sir.
Probably no, but I said to Phil at the beginning, Ralph Macchia, the editor, was right, and probably Ralph himself quipped, but I think he was absolutely on the right wavelength. He sort of said, this isn't a Clive Barker comic. And I was writing I was writing so many of the Clive Barker titles at that time that probably, I was in a little. Yeah, I was in the zone over here. And then it's, devil here. And you just don't separate the two. So when Ralph called me out on that, I was like, okay. So I can't imagine, but I probably could imagine. But
like I said, it's 1992. I don't know if they want their mascot Spider-Man in a story like that too. It's like, oh, my 7-year-old picked up this Spider-Man. This Daredevil because Spider-Man was in it.
When were the Carnage comics? Right?
I know. I know.
Please. I mean, I know. I do not. The things that Spider-Man went through in his own titles, mm-hmm. I do not, under any circumstances, this could have been full-on Hellraiser, and it would still been Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm compared to some Carnage stories. So Spider-Man went through a lot. So I think that we took good care of their character.
Yeah.
We were respectful. We treated him in the right way, and believe me, knowing Danny Fingeroff, if we were off base, Danny would have had no hesitation of marching into the office and this ain't gonna happen, and throwing the plot right down and call Dan and tell him to make it work. So the fact he did not means we were in a good place.
Oh no, I'm a big fan of Spider-Man, and especially this era, and I think you wrote him very in character. It sounds just exactly like Peter Parker.
And it's fun, because I think at that point Scott Stile was still he was still exploring different things, and he hadn't quite found what he would later become. So his Spider-Man in this issue, in these two issues, is very. I always think it's kind of like Bagley-esque. It's got a sort of a more stretched out, Mark Bagley feeling to it, which also I think,
and that's always a good thing.
Okay. And that's always a good thing, yeah. And it worked well for a character. It's funny looking at this stuff now though, because for me at least, everything about Scott to me just zones in as Fall from Grace and afterwards, including like Elektra and all those other things. So when I look back at this, I see both his overall character style is different, but his storytelling style is different too. Like even the choices he makes of how to break things out from panel to panel is less stylized and sort of more, call it standard. It's good storytelling no matter either way. But in my head, I'm so used to that when I go back to this, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just a different rhythm.
That's like the sign of a great artist. Like you could see like them, evolving over time. The other, if it just stayed the same over years and years, it's just like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, and there's people who do that and do that fine, and then there's people who are, who are actually extraordinarily good at what they do, and then they get challenged. Over the beginning of the week, I don't know if you guys saw it. There was this heartbreaking. I thought it was heartbreaking. Kind of thread on Twitter about the artist Herb Trimpe. Do you know his work at all?
Oh yeah,
Herb. I mean, an amazing artist. And developed Wolverine and did seminal work on the Hulk and many other things. And this thread was just about how it probably around this time. Frankly, 90, 95, 96. His style and the style of sort of, call it the old guard, became marginalized, right? Because of the newer artists and the hot artists and what was perceived as, well, this is what people want to read in comics. And so guys like him who had amazing talent and amazing storytelling ability were just not being used as much. And that became problematic for their livelihood. And some of them tried to adjust, right? But not even evolving. Like they were being told by editors, kind of do this, do more of this, but that's not you, right? So you're not even having a chance to evolve. You're just being told, try to do something you don't really know or feel how to do. So, but fortunately, that's not the case with, Scott. Scott was just learning, I think, who he needed to be or wanted to be rather. And it was fun just to be part of that journey with him.
I mean, I like looking at art and being able to tell the difference. Like, oh, okay, this is McDaniel or this is Trimpe or whoever it is. And do you think, I don't know, more modern comics with more digital ways of doing art is it becoming more, I don't know, cut and paste and just more people's styles are looking more similar just because of digital?
I don't know. I mean, there's so many artists that work just in so many different ways, and that's kind of the beauty of.
And every generation has that style, that
sure.
they kind of idealize and kind of work from too. I think has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some comics today that are so over rendered. If you want to, think about that. I mean, certainly the comics in the 90s, got very over rendered in a lot of ways. And look, how many pockets I can put on here. But pouches. It's pouches, pockets. But there's, I think the digital thing, Phil, probably comes most to the fore when you see what coloring can do to some styles, because you can look at things with digital coloring that can coloring can always drastically alter, I think, a black and white image. Oh, yeah. But I think an over-rendered quality in coloring can take it too far really easily, whereas somebody using digital coloring can really, draw out. I think that gets back to just how important it is that everybody working on a book or a story kind of is in sync with each other, or at least has a chance to touch base with each other, because without it, you're sort of in silos. Oh, I'm going to color this, and I'm not even going to think about what the artist was trying to do. Or I'm going to ink this, and I'm not even going to think about what the artist was trying to do. So there's a lot of artists who do, I think, very much a combination. I mean, I've seen Lee Weeks, to stay in Daredevil world, I mean, I've seen him on some of his Facebook, video streams, do work on the computer. And then I've seen him leaning over the drafting table, getting more ink on himself than he is on the page half the time. But, but it's, so I think it's whatever feels right for them, at least at that generation,
And do you think is everyone, I don't know if the artists or the people at Marvel too are also considering it's digital comics are so much bigger now. So it's how is this going to translate to, the people reading this on a screen as opposed to paper?
I don't get that sense at all unless, just as a reader, unless it's been developed specifically for a webtoons, sort of thing, and I don't think I would like to see more of that. I'd be really interested as a reader and a creator to see more of that specific thinking. But I don't think I think probably 90% of things are just thought of as it's a comic page, and then we're going to be able to run it through whatever the Comixology engine or something, and then do the panel shift if we need to. But do you guys read a lot of digital comics yourselves? So how do you, Lilith, when you read, do you look at the whole page, or do you use that sort of panel-to-panel scan that some of them have?
It actually depends on the company. For Marvel, I do the panel-to-panel. And then for other things, say Image or Archie Comics, I kind of do it the other way.
And why is that? Does it just feel like
I don't know, it's just the flow. Yeah, when you look at a page, because I've been just doing it for so long, when I look at a page, I'm nope, I got to switch this. It's just I don't know, it's just one of those brain things.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's I think that scanning, I guess the reason I was asking the question, I think the scanning, Phil, is just kind of, it's easier to zoom in on things.
Yeah.
But I don't think the story's been rethought. This is how somebody's going to read it. That's just a kind of a zoom function, right? Oh, people can't see as well on an iPad, so they're going to zoom in or whatever on it. But I think if some comics end up being created specifically for the screen,
it'll have a better flow.
Well, or you'll play out things in a different way. I mean, I've been, there were about 6 or 7 comics I did toward the end of my real time in comics, right? Which were the Marvel Cyber comics. Did you guys ever see these?
Yeah.
So these were really early experiments in digital comics, and they were fun to work on because I was really interested in that. But those were revealing panels and things in crude ways, but they were being triggered specifically by things you were doing as the reader, right? You would click on a control panel, and that would make things happen, or the panels would sort of shift in and out in a different way than than just moving from, one to the other. I don't know if that's any better or any worse from a storytelling point of view, but it's a little bit more tied into when we created them, we had to think about, all right, Captain America is going to slide into panel here, versus we're just going to go to another complete panel, or, sound effects are going to trigger this or this. It was a weird experiment. I wish I had those scripts. I mean, frankly, I would love to know what the hell I was writing to describe those things, because those don't exist anymore, as far as I know, in a way that you can actually interact with them.
Yeah.
I just captured a lot of them as videos back when I still had the programs that could run them. So as far as I know, they only exist as like video captures versus things that you could actually interact with, like a computer program.
So I'm guessing you're afraid of another big crash, because what was it the other day? Was it on Facebook or Twitter? I saw you were like, I'm going to start writing everything on this again, and was it a typewriter?
This is the Lego typewriter.
Oh, was it Lego?
It was because I'm just such a big Lego geek. They actually are coming out with a Lego typewriter that is, I don't know how many pieces, or I'm sure it costs way too much money, but the keys actually work when you press down the keys. It's got the little, that's whoever designs Lego things has just the best job in the world, and just crazy creativity and mechanics and the way you can sort of put things together.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually, if you've seen it, and maybe you haven't if you're not a Lego fan, there's actually a Daily Bugle Lego set that they came out with.
I saw that. That thing's huge, and it come off like 20 or 30 figures or something.
There's a Daredevil figure in there, which is, as far as I know, the only official Daredevil figure.
So black people only sell the Daredevil figure.
Well,
keep everything else.
But how bad is this? I remain severely tempted to purchase that kit just for
the Daredevil,
for that reason alone. Yeah, I'd build it too, but it would just be, it's one of those unwieldy things that you're really not you don't have a place to put it up.
So when you see the big Daily Bugle behind them next time, kids, you'll know where that came from.
Exactly. What's that thing on the shelf? It took place there. I have enough Legos over there that I'm always worried that I'm going to knock into them and knock over something and destroy it. So,
see, I have a good excuse. I have an 8-year-old, so I can be like, oh yeah, that whole Legos for him. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that's how I acquired most of mine. My son was mad for Legos when he was young, and we have many kits. And he had actually built the Death Star one, which is like a giant, which is incredible. And he was so careful about it forever and ever. And literally, he had one of those moments, like in the Spider-Man movie, where a friend of his literally tripped over and destroyed it on him. So it was one of those just moments of time to move on.
So going back to this story. Oh my Lord. Lilith, do you have any questions? Because
no.
I hogged the beginning of this episode.
No, feel free.
I swear I had a question and it just flew out of my mouth.
Let me ask you guys a question. Just, when characters like this are introduced into a story, like this villain, and then, for various reasons, do characters like this feel like they should come back at some point? Or does it feel like her story was so complete in the way that it was wrapped up that, no, I don't really think she needs to kind of come back or be used again?
Back in the 90s, you could have that feeling. But modern comics, it's like you just always feel like it's always like a cliffhanger or a little breadcrumb. They could come back. Even if they never do, they could come back. But yeah, this felt kind of complete.
Okay.
But then it's like if they do come back, it's like, ooh, new plot.
Right, right.
I mean,
and is that okay though as a reader when a story feels complete like that, or do you feel cheated because you sort of want that feeling that there's going to, I want to be threaded on?
Like I sense of completion sometimes, because there's some characters that never come back and you're just left wondering, and they didn't have a completed arc and you're just like, somebody dropped the plot on that. I don't like that feeling. That is the worst feeling.
Right. I've seen that.
So I do like a complete arc for a villain. Absolutely. And if they come back, that's icing on the cake for me.
I mean, I felt that it felt like a completed arc, but I mean, I wouldn't have minded seeing the character again, because I did like her as a foil for Matt. I just thought, she was a nice little opposite of him, because he cares so much about people and she just sees people as, profit.
Yep.
And I'm always like, well, why didn't she come back? Was this always your plan, or are you just like, maybe he just never got back to this character? But yeah, I mean, it felt like a completed arc, but I would have loved to see her again. That's
interesting. No, that's good. And then good to know. I think, looking back at this stuff and other things, I think one of my Achilles heels, was I seem to introduce characters that I think are interesting now. I probably thought they were interesting then. And then I just keep moving on. Oh, let's create another set of new characters. And maybe I should have spent more time going back to them.
I mean, there's always the danger too. You don't want to come back to the same villain like every 2 months too.
Exactly.
To the villains that shall not be named.
Yeah.
Hi, Venom.
Here's your yearly appearance, like clockwork.
Well, when you get those numbers, I guess that makes sense. Like, let's just keep finding a way to bring it back.
But as a professional comics writer, it's like, maybe if it's somebody you trust or you like their writing, but it's like, would you want someone else to have picked up this character, or would you have been afraid that they would have? Are you afraid people would misinterpret your characters?
Well, people always misinterpret characters. I mean, that happened all the time. But when people you trusted did things with them, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the most fun. I mean, and there was certainly people, I trusted a lot, who I was friends with or long time, allies with, who, if they want to kind of go run with it, Greg Wright was, came in and out of the Daredevil universe, a lot because of his relationship with me and Ralph and such. So Greg could have picked up on anything, and as far as I was concerned, and played it out, and I wouldn't have looked twice, in that, where this story goes, from here, when we get to Vegas, right, we play the Dead Man's Hand stuff out, and that's with Fabian and Chuck and Chuck Dixon and those guys I knew well, right? So we were doing a crossover story there, and that wasn't playing with a character like this, but yeah, whatever you're going to do, I know it's going to be good. I know you're going to leave. I know you're going to respect what I give you, like as the handoff point, and I know you're going to give me back something that I can work with, and not just here's a huge mess. You go figure it out, right? Which, or I'm going to take your character and run away with it and do the strangest things possible, and then you're going to scratch your head and and want to, is that even my character anymore, or a character I recognize? Probably not.
I mean, we're gonna definitely do Dead Man's Hand at some point one day, but it's like, I wonder if we could get those other two guys too, because I think it would be interesting just to be like, okay, did you, how did you see, did DG, translate the Punisher the way you thought he was, Chuck, and it's like vice versa. How did you think they handled the Daredevil in their books? And
oh yeah. I mean, I remember working that story out over lunch. I mean, that's how easy that was. And maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe they thought Dan was a complete bore and he was impossible to work with. But I remember going out to lunch with those guys and saying, and we just sort of sketching out the whole sequence and saying, this is what's going to, the major story beat's going to end here. Fabian, you're going to pick it up here. Major story beat's going to end here. Chuck's going to pick it up there. Dan, back to you, or whatever it was. However the thing, and that was, and then everybody kind of goes off and does it, and then I'm sure we called each other or sent each other the plots or faxed each other the plots, and that modern technology that cracked me up reading this one. It's like that, like using the fax technology. But yeah, if you could get them together, they probably have far better memories than I do. certainly Fabian never forgets anything.
It sounds like a well-oiled machine, 3 guys who respect each other. That's like, it's the last couple of weeks, Lilith and I have covered some of the Atlantis Attacks annuals, and I'm like, I don't know how you guys did, like, people just like, when the annual thing goes through, like, everyone's annual that year, it's like, and basically the whole Marvel line's like in there. I'm like, how do they do that?
Yeah, sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's just a nod to things. Sometimes I've got to acknowledge that New York has been sent into another dimension. Yeah. And that's all I need to sort of, put a headline on a newspaper in that day, or, a broadcast on a TV monitor or something. But sometimes it's integrated and you've got a lot more to do. And always better in my experience, when you have the creators thinking things through and having a chance to kind of connect on that, because they would then really invest themselves. And that's true with any creative thing. I mean, that's when you invest yourself in it and you really feel like you're thinking it through more, then it comes to life better and you want to run with it as opposed to being told, you're a set of hands, do this with this character. Right? Mm-hmm. Like once, getting back to Spider-Man and these issues, yeah, I guarantee you, we said, let's bring Spider-Man for sales. I'm going to be completely honest. That would have been, a reason to do it. But once we had Spider-Man, then it was
you want the reader to come back. You want the reader to come back after he's gone, yeah.
But you also want to make it work for you, because if the story doesn't work for you, then you're just going by the numbers. And so that's where it starts to become, you lose yourself in the story a little bit, and you let Spider-Man actually drag you into different places than you thought you were going to go, because he is going to do that. That character is going to tell you, if you allow him or her to take you into some cool, interesting places. And that's where those type of crossovers or whatever, become better, because you've been allowed to, move with the character and the storyline versus just being told, have to do this, So,
have you ever had like a person that wanted their character to do a crossover with Daredevil, and you're just like, nah, wouldn't work?
Like we're in an instance where somebody said they wanted to use Daredevil and play it out. The only instance I could think of was just after 300, where a lot of people still wanted to use the Kingpin, and they wanted to use the Kingpin as if nothing had happened. Like, people would come to us with plots and say, oh, the Kingpin's, in a skyscraper and he's lording it over New York and he's running this. No. We just destroyed Fisk. We just completely tore him down to the roots. But why not? Why can't we do this? Because we just did this. So if you want to use Fisk on the streets and, have him kind of doing some street level thing or whatever, fine. But we're planning to kind of build him back up. That was the only instance where I can remember us sort of saying, don't play with it in that way. We always try to be good citizens and sharers, because we knew that at some point we'd want to use somebody else. So we try to be, nice folks about that.
All right, I'm going to cut that there. Again, thank you, sir, for another great month. We got a lot of behind the scenes talk this time, but all right, before we go, let them know where they can sign up for the newsletter, and like I said, mention that appearance you're doing at the end of July.
All right, my plug time. Great. Please, if you're interested in more of this type of stuff, sign up for my newsletter at storymaze.substack.com. It's about a once-a-week newsletter with behind-the-scenes stuff like this and other writing ideas. And then my first comic book convention that I've actually been invited to, not just showing up at, in many, many years, is the Terrificon in Connecticut at the Mohegan Suns Casino at the end of July. So I will be there that Saturday and Sunday, which is July 31st and August 1st, I believe. So if you're in the Northeast area, it looks like an enormous convention with just tons of comic pros and pop culture appearances. So it looks like a great show overall. So if folks are there, come by, get some things signed, mispronounce my name, all good things like that.
And I always have the link for your newsletter in our show notes. So
thank you guys. All right. So you got to bail. You're going to go talk to Mr. DeMattis and
yes, sir.
Have fun with that. And just let's touch base and figure out what our next chit chat's about.
Oh yes. Oh, I'll let you know. Yes, we'll set up a time. But next month, of course, I wanted to loop into that Black Widow stuff. Your Punisher Black Widow story.
Oh, excellent! That's a great time.
And I figured something other than Daredevil for once. But yeah, the Punisher Black Widow story. So
and the timing will be perfect, right?
Exactly.
Very well planned. I like it.
I try. All right, kids. So yes, just find everything Capes and Lunatics at Linktree, linktr.ee/Capes and Lunatics. All our social media, this YouTube, you can watch the video, our Patreon, our merchandise. So yeah, go check us out there. All right. Again, sir, thank you so much for your time. We always really appreciate it. It's always a great time. So
a lot of fun, guys. You have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.